My channel is sponsored by DREO, which means I will have an ad for them somewhere in the middle of today's video. What's good, Deck Gang? Important question for the audience. What would you say is the reason the Steam Deck has managed to be so successful? I have 3 key reasons that I'm going to tell you at the end of this video, but I think today's news roundup has stories that covers all 3 of these factors. The first story is about a big release that couldn't be saved by the Steam Deck, but I'm also going to cover a potential breakthrough in emulation on the deck, a new Switch game that showcases why the Steam Deck is superior, Valve possibly partnering with Sony, and more. Let's jump right into that first story, but don't forget to leave a like and a sub on my way to 100K. For a long time now, From Software has actually had quite an embattled relationship with the PC. Many of us have forgotten about it by now because of all the good-ass video games, but that relationship is still a little bit rocky. Before Dark Souls 1, of course, From Software exclusively made games for consoles, and almost all of those were exclusive to PlayStation systems specifically. But that first port to PC, Dark Souls, actually became the poster boy for bad PC ports. It was seen as especially bad because there was a modder named Durante who was able to fix Dark Souls all by himself. The game didn't allow you to set arbitrary resolutions, and it had locked frame rates, which are of course categorical sins in PC land, but up until Dark Souls we hadn't really made a campaign out of it. It's possible that one modder named Durante helped move the industry forward quite a bit on this effort. If you search up DSFix Durante, you can find a mod for Dark Souls on Nexus Mods and ModDB. DSFix allowed you to play with unlocked frame rates and arbitrary resolutions, among other key fixes. Ever since then, From Software has gotten much better, but you can say that they've never exactly been good at making PC ports. Even Elden Ring is a good example of this that would have gotten a lot more bad press had it not been for the Steam Deck, in my opinion. Elden Ring suffered from really bad shader compilation stutters on Windows PCs, and honestly, performance could have been much better, but that went mostly undiscussed because the headline was the really bad stutters. Steam Deck managed to completely sidestep the shader compilation stutters thanks to a cache of pre-compiled shaders that Valve maintains and distributes to all Steam Deck users. This cache meant that players never had to compile the shaders on the fly, and so they would never see the stutters. More importantly, even though performance could have been better, it was good enough to reach about 40 FPS on what was the brand new Steam Deck. Elden Ring and Steam Deck launched a day apart from each other, and the game certainly helped to cement the status of the handheld. It helps to have the biggest release of the year playable on your new piece of hardware. That is likely why Valve paid extra close attention to the deck compatibility for this game, working with From Software ahead of release to make sure it was as good as could be in time for the launch of the deck. So the game certainly helped the hardware cement its status, but the hardware also kinda helped the game. As I alluded to, I think Steam Deck helped Elden Ring reduce the amount of bad press it could have otherwise gotten, despite being one of the best games of all time. Just 2 years later, we now have Shadow of the Erdtree, the DLC for Elden Ring that is almost as big as the base game. The DLC is a masterpiece just as the base game is, but it is nonetheless getting some pretty bad reviews on Steam. The base game is sitting at 92% positive reviews, whereas the DLC only has 65% positive reviews. Some of those negative reviews are due to the difficulty, which I will get to as well, but I would say most of the reception is due to poor performance. Let's look at the Steam Deck performance briefly. For this, I turn to my friend Deck Wizard, who has done the hard work of getting his save ready for the DLC and actually playing through a good portion of it. I'll share some non-spoiler bits of video, but the point is that with low to medium settings, it will stay above 30 FPS. It's going to hover in the mid to high 30s in the open world and denser areas, and then stay between 40 to 50 for dungeons and interiors. Given that these settings are low to medium, you're going to want to set anti-aliasing to high to prevent artifacting on the player character. And of course, if that's low to medium, then the Steam Deck is going to have lots of trouble with high and max settings. Deck Wizard's video showed this off with frequent drops to 25, 20, or even 15 FPS at those settings. Even on the low to medium settings, by the way, the Deck Wizard recommends a hard cap of 30 FPS in the quick access menu because otherwise the unstable frame time will cause severe stutters during boss fights, which can quite literally cost you the battle thanks to the very unforgiving nature of this DLC. In any case, this is a pretty big drop in performance from the base game to now with Erdtree having been released. It's still playable as evidenced by Deck Wizard playing through so much of the DLC exclusively on the deck, but it seems a far cry from the performance of Elden Ring on the deck back in early 2022. I should say that there was a quick patch from Valve to fix a rare crash that would sometimes occur in Elden Ring after the DLC was released, but naturally there was nothing that Valve could do on their end to address the general state of Elden Ring's performance. This is also amplified by user reviews that are claiming Erdtree is too difficult. Now there is a bit of delicious irony in some of these reviewers likely being some of the same people that criticized Eurogamer for also finding the DLC too difficult, but in any case, difficult DLC should be considered a hallmark of From Software. As hard as base Souls games tend to be, the DLC always ratchets it up even further with the expectation that the DLC is for the folks that have already mastered the base game but are somehow still looking for an extraordinary challenge. In any case, it seems that Erdtree may not be for everyone, but it will nonetheless be considered a masterpiece in the eyes of the hardcore. Whichever way you personally look at it, I think we can all agree that it's time for From Software to invest in people that can do a great job of porting to PC. Remember how I mentioned the modder Durante? Well, he has since co-founded a PC porting studio called PH3. Maybe Miyazaki and the team should be looking to that studio for a little help. Alright, I need to quickly share that Steam Deck LCDs are on sale for 15% off as Valve are getting rid of their remaining 64GB and 512GB stock. This means that the 64GB LCD comes to under $300 and the 512GB LCD comes to around $380, which actually makes it cheaper than the 256GB LCD Steam Deck. That one is still $400. If you don't have a deck or you're looking for a spare, this should be a good pickup. While the Steam Deck OLED does bring a considerable amount of improvements, the LCD is still one of the best gaming devices out there, and this deal makes it an even better value. Now, this channel is called Fan the Deck, right? But have I told you about Fan the Deck's fan? Okay, fine. If you think of a better pun, let me know in the comments, but today's sponsor is DREO, and this is their air circulator fan. It's genuinely the most impressive fan I've ever owned for 3 reasons. It's super powerful, it's really quiet, and it's not just a fan. The wind of the DREO Poly fan can reach incredibly far and keep a big room cool. There are 9 levels of power, so you can keep it low and super quiet, or you can pump it all the way up to 9 to cool a large room. It has this omnidirectional oscillation so that the airflow doesn't just go horizontally, but also vertically, and the fact that it's such a great air circulator allows it to improve natural ventilation and air quality by placing it next to an open window, or you can pair it with your air conditioner to help you circulate your cool air throughout. The remote has everything you need, but even if you misplace it, you can always use the DREO mobile app to control this fan even when the remote is out of reach. The app even allows you to change the direction the fan is facing using the 3D angle control so you can angle it perfectly when you're in bed or on your workout equipment. Basically, everything is customizable so you can tailor it to whatever your needs are. So pick one up now using the link in my description for 10% off. Thank you to DREO for sponsoring this video. Ever since the Steam Deck released, one of the most popular questions was how well did it handle emulation, and for me it's been kind of a dream. Not just from the perspective of what the hardware was capable of, but more importantly the developer community that formed around it. EmuDeck is one of the best examples of this. EmuDeck made the process of installing, configuring, and optimizing emulators so much easier than it had ever been in my experience. In addition to that though, we had developers updating individual emulators with improvements that were specifically targeted at the Steam Deck or at the very least low-end machines. And today we have another emulator with what is possibly a big milestone in that regard. RPCS3 recently tweeted that further SPU optimizations have been made thanks to the contributions of developer ELAD335. Specifically, they called out how big the performance gains are for low-end CPUs. This caused a lot of people to ask how much this would improve performance on the Steam Deck, so I did a bunch of testing across 4 titles: Demon's Souls, Ratchet & Clank HD, Tokyo Jungle, and Super Stardust HD. I tested the most recent version of RPCS3 at the time, that's the version that ends in 16626, and I compared it to 16611. The latter version does not have the SPU optimizations, and the former version does. When it comes to frame rate, I didn't perceive much of an improvement there, but once I opened the RPCS3 performance overlay, I did see something else that caught my eye. What I noticed here is that the CPU utilization is significantly reduced. For example, when I play the opening segment of Demon's Souls in the older version of RPCS3, you can see that CPU utilization hovers between 40 and 45, but in the newer version, CPU utilization hovers between 30 and 35, which is about a 25% improvement. And even if you don't perceive a performance improvement in terms of frame rate, this should overall mean better battery life, and it should mean a more stable experience. Based on this, I would really like to do some more testing with more demanding games like Metal Gear Solid 4 and Little Big Planet, because there is potential for the games to be more significant in areas where the CPU is already highly utilized. Let me know what games you'd like to see me test, and I'll see if I can do a more in-depth video on this subject. Interestingly, this all comes on the heels of the leaks that Sony will be bringing native PS3 games to PS5. Most recently, Jeff Grubb confirmed that he's heard this as well, saying, "It's something that I've heard has been in the works for quite some time. I thought it was going to get revealed earlier this year when I first heard about it. That clearly didn't happen, but that doesn't mean it will never happen. Maybe it does." End quote. I'm curious to see what games Sony is bringing to PS5, but honestly, I'd really like to see them embrace some of the unique multiplayer experiences from the PS3 with games like Warhawk, Uncharted 2, and Killzone 2. Keeping in the subject of emulation, look, I love Nintendo's games, both historical and current. I would never have made this channel if I didn't love video games, and Nintendo is a company that makes genuinely good games in my opinion, but we know for a fact that they're not immune to bad decisions, and I've seen them fumble easy wins many times in the past. Unfortunately, their recent release of Perfect Dark on Nintendo Switch Online is one such occasion. Not only does it fall short of the original release, not only does it fall short of the Xbox release, but it's also significantly worse than the best option that's available, a native PC port that can be played portably on the Steam Deck and even has support for trackpads, flickstick, and gyro. There was a recent tweet thread from Grassloo that went into why the Switch version of Perfect Dark is so bad. If you don't know Grassloo, he is a top player and notable person in the GoldenEye and Perfect Dark community. Suffice it to say, he's an expert in both games. In any case, his tweet thread is damning, with the Switch version being downright broken in some instances. The dizzy effect, for example, has been made impossible to navigate. On the original N64 hardware, the effect looks and feels unsettling, but you can still fumble your way towards a given goal. But on the Switch, the frames all blur together, eventually forming a completely white screen that renders you unable to see anything at all. What's worse is that it actually appears to freeze the screen entirely. Likewise, Perfect Dark has a neat effect where smoke emits from the barrel of a gun after firing full auto. On the N64, this doesn't affect gameplay whatsoever, but on the Switch version, it begins to lag nonsensically after only a handful of rounds. As Grassloo points out, this is a pretty bad outcome considering the game is all about shooting. And honestly, these are just the big things he mentioned. The sound is also way too low, many visual effects are worse overall, and some textures have weird issues that don't appear in the original title. It's also bad that Grassloo compared it to running the same game on an emulator from 2007. Thankfully, not only are emulators so much better now, but PC players actually have another option that's even more attractive: playing the game natively on PC with widescreen resolution, frame rates up to 120 FPS, mouse look, and netplay that's more reliable than NSO's offering. If you want to play this on the Steam Deck, I'll leave a link in the description, but it's pretty easy to do. You basically download the latest version, place your ROM in the right folder, modify the INI file to set the resolution, and customize the configs how you like and add to Steam. On the Deck, this is an absolute joy to play and feels like the only way this game should be enjoyed, because the frame rate is smooth, the image quality is clean, and the controls can be modernized to whatever you prefer, whether it's a pad or a mouse or flickstick and gyro like I like to do. But either way, there is one thing that's proven by this whole debacle: free and open source developers really deserve our thanks for their efforts in game preservation. The next story is about EA maybe giving up. This was noticed on the Fan2Deck Discord. If you look at the Steam page for EA's upcoming anticipated RPG, Dragon Age: The Veilguard, you'll see that there's no notice about an EA launcher. EA has been extremely consistent about posting these notices for upcoming games, so this seems unlikely to be an oversight. That said, it could be something that's just for this game specifically. Recently, Rogue Prince of Persia was released with no Ubi launcher included, but then just a couple days ago, Ubisoft released Beyond Good and Evil Anniversary Edition, which not only has the Ubisoft Connect launcher, but also has BattleEye and Denuvo, all for a single player game. Hopefully publishers take notice of how this affects the Steam Deck experience and make the necessary adjustments, because honestly, this is just not fun to deal with. Alright, this story is about Valve possibly partnering with Sony for some hardware that's coming to PC, that being the PSVR 2. Recently, the VR content creator, Sadly It's Bradley, tweeted about some code that was updated in Steam. This code is the functionality that would originally register a free copy of Half-Life Alyx to new buyers of the Valve Index, but it's been curiously updated to add 3 more hardware components that would also seemingly award this game to those pieces of hardware. The variables listed here are temporary, so it's unclear what they're tied to, but likewise, Brad also tweeted about Valve preparing Steam VR for the upcoming PSVR 2 drivers on PC. Between these two pieces of news, the natural speculation here is that Valve may be planning on gifting a copy of Half-Life Alyx to any Steam player that uses PSVR 2 on Steam, or perhaps it'll be tied to the purchase of the PSVR 2 dongle itself. Obviously, this is still speculation, but it wouldn't be the first time Valve and Sony work together on a game gift for Steam users on Sony hardware. Back in 2011, when Valve's relationship with Microsoft was even more fraught than it is now, Portal 2 was the first, and I believe only, game released to PS3 with some Steamworks features like automatic updates, downloadable content, and community support. By purchasing the game on PS3 and logging into a Steam account or creating one altogether, players got a free copy of the same game for PC and OS X at no additional charge. This partnership was a bit surprising at the time, considering how critical Gabe Newell had been of PlayStation prior to this. As part of the announcement of Portal 2 on PS3, Gabe said, "When the PlayStation 3 was introduced, I was one of the platform's biggest critics. However, Sony has proved that the PlayStation 3 is the most open platform of all the current generation consoles and has worked extremely hard to make the platform the most desirable for consumers and developers. As such, we are delighted to announce Portal 2 for the PlayStation 3, and we believe the Steamworks support included will make it the best console version of the game." It should be noted that this experience was also ahead of its time when it came to crossplay. It wasn't the very first crossplay game, of course, but it was a good early implementation, and it allowed me to be on my PC and play co-op with my buddy who was on PS3. I later convinced this very buddy of mine to get a Steam Deck, his very first gaming PC, which I think is pretty cool. What do you think? In any case, it would be pretty interesting if Valve and Sony were to partner up like this again. It's also possible that this could be for some other piece of hardware, maybe even a new headset from Valve, but personally, I think PSVR 2 seems like the most likely scenario here. Because I know I have some fighting game fanatics in my audience, I really wanted to celebrate the announcement of the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection. 10 more years, 10 more years. For those that don't know, 10 more years is the mantra that many of us were chanting just 10 years ago. Ironically, fans of the Marvel vs. Capcom series had gotten used to not getting any new games, and we rode high on the fumes of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for over 10 years. So when MVC3 got announced, the hype cycle began anew, and we all knew we had 10 more years of hype ahead of us. It was quite the self-fulfilling prophecy, and now with MVC Fighting Collection being announced, Capcom and Marvel have managed to spark our hopes once more. The collection itself includes MVC2 and all of the Marvel crossover fighting games leading up to it, like X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Marvel Superheroes. Curiously, it also includes the arcade beat-em-up The Punisher, which I'm not mad at. Many of us hope this is just the beginning and we get to see more from Marvel and Capcom in the coming years. All right, I promised that I would give the 3 reasons that the Steam Deck is successful, at least in my mind. Hopefully you left your thoughts in the comments. Personally, I like to think it's because of these factors. Number 1, the ease of use, courtesy of Valve, focusing on a streamlined operating system designed primarily for gaming. Number 2, a large library of games thanks to a history of developers making games for PCs. And number 3, amazing community support courtesy of people like you and bolstered by Valve's support of free and open source software. Do these reasons match up with what you said? Do you agree with what I'm saying? Let me know what you think. I hope you're all having a wonderful week. Deck Gang out. Goodbye.